Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. All right, ladies and gents, welcome back to part 2 with Sam Steiner. If you didn't listen to part 1, you need to. We talk about Sam's entry into police work and then a lot of the stressors he navigated. And we did quite a bit talking about just peer support culture and how to navigate those things, how to support your people, and tangible examples from his own experience, trauma in his early life, and as the things that he experienced in the job. But Sam, welcome back to the show, by the way.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me again.
Yeah, man. So as we were chatting, and time flew for you and me. This is what happens in a dynamic conversation. But you made sure, before we started even recording in the first place, you didn't want to focus on just the negatives, which is absolutely not the point. But I think it does help paint the picture as to why your takeaways and growth from the positive is so impactful and why it's so important. So I did jump. We sliced through some years, when I asked you about your worst day. So as far as being a cop, finally realizing this dream and getting started, let's talk about that and what you want to share as far as when we talk about this holistic thing about, first responder, police work, and then resilience therein.
Yeah, sure. So as I talked about on the previous episode, I started I went to college in New Mexico and got hired on with the Carlsbad Police Department in Southeast New Mexico. I worked there, got through the academy, got through FTO, and immediately working there, I kind of found my passion. Actually, I remember one of my earliest memories of being off FTO was hearing two sergeants in the car with each other, driving around, and those guys just knew everybody in the city. And so they would hop in a car together and just run everybody they saw for warrants. They'd go, to the different areas of the city and just kick off all these foot pursuits and end up arresting all these people for great warrants and getting bad people off the street. And I remember thinking that's how I want to be. I want to start learning the community, learning who the people are, and getting to know who everyone is. And so I just kind of model myself. I found those senior officers that I really looked up to and started trying to model myself after them. I was extremely proactive. When I was young, I had very little, I don't want to say I didn't have control, but I was, very just kind of ADHD, go after every little thing. And that's how I stayed for the 2 years I was at Carlsbad. And then after a couple of years, I realized growing up, I always wanted to be a police officer in the Seattle area. And I knew kind of the areas I wanted to work. I wanted to work somewhere busy. My whole life, I never wanted to work somewhere slow. I wanted to be where the action was. And so I ended up applying with a few agencies in South King County and was fortunate enough to get hired by Kent PD in 2014. At that time, and still to this day, in a different way, Kent was a very proactive agency as well. And so I just kind of brought that same kind of style of police work to Kent, and I found that I was very successful coming to Kent. And I really think that that's how you learn the most, is by being proactive. You can handle hundreds and hundreds of calls and you'll never learn how to be proactive. But the more proactive you are, the quicker you will get better at handling calls. It just makes you a better officer. And after about 2 years, I was selected to be an FTO. At that time, I had about 4 years on.
Pretty normal out of necessity across the nation now, but yeah, back then, that was super short.
Yeah, I remember it was kind of controversial when I got picked to be an FTO with such short time on. Some of the senior officers were, we're kind of upset about it. And now, if we had a 4-year officer that wanted to be an FTO, we'd be rolling out the red carpet
We've
for him.
probably been nagging him for 2 years. Yeah.
Yeah. You got off probation. Can you please be an FTO? We
I do want to say a couple things before I feel like I could make a note, but we might move way past it. But one, it's like a nod to folks like, yeah, lean into your weaknesses and like just fail fast. Like, get over your mistakes, right? Like start small, like proactivity. And the reason why I interrupted and I said that is like I've heard officers literally say that they don't know how to be proactive. And so like I'm not judging, I'm just trying to break it down so we can start small. But like, okay, do you know how to drive around and look for something of that perks your interest in the case of suspicious activity that may be illegal or leaning towards illegal? Or okay, so that's one thing. Two, violations, right? So traffic stops are, such an easy entry point to be quote unquote proactive, right? Something's very clearly illegal. You are allowed to stop it. You should address it, especially when you have the discretion to do so and the time to do so. And so that's where you start doing that. And then beyond that, like all these emails, all these, be on the lookout or extra patrol requests, all these kind of annoying, like, hey, can you do this? Hey, bosses, can you look at that? Like that is not only permission, but it's a potential to empower you to like, yeah, someone cares, aka this business. Business is suffering because these people are loitering outside doing drugs in open air. They have signs, aka PC, for you to talk to them. So it's not even like, how do I have the gift of the gab to get from point A to B to warrant arrest, all this dope? Like, no, just go talk to them. You have the legal means to do so. So like, if you boil it down like that, I think most even younger officers are like, okay, that's not so scary. So it's not like, let's just start doing it.
Well, and I've talked to tons of officers about that have come to me and said, man, like, I want to be proactive. I want to go out and do it, but I drive around and I don't see anything. And what I tell them is, yeah, you absolutely are seeing. I don't have like special eyes that I see different things than you do when we drive in the same areas. You are seeing everything I'm seeing, and you are immediately convincing yourself why you do not have enough to make that contact. Okay, that guy hid the narcotics he was smoking. Oh man, was that narcotics? Could it have been a cigarette? Okay, I'm not going to make that stop because I don't want to be wrong. Or this person made a pedestrian violation. It ran in front of traffic. Okay, yeah, I can stop them, but is that enough? Like, is somebody going to say something if I stop them for that? Okay, I'm not going to make that stop. And they can go their whole shift seeing all these different things and subconsciously convince themselves out of making those contacts. And I tell them all, like, the only way to become confident in making those proactive stops is by forcing yourself to do them. I didn't have some magical thing where when I was new, I was super confident on every contact I made. I had to learn too. And criminals are really, really good at figuring out if you're new, engaging your level of confidence in your stop.
Yeah.
And when you are new, they're going to try to take advantage of that. And they're going to try to challenge you. The first thing out of everybody's mouth when you stop them is, no, I wasn't doing what you said I was doing.
Yeah.
And then they're gauging your reaction to that.
Like,
right? And if you're like, you weren't doing that?
Yeah.
You weren't doing that? Okay. All right. Well, just if you were, don't do it again, and you let them go. Or you just are confident, no, I saw you doing that, and you're not free to go. And then they'll generally, be okay, fine. Yeah, you stopped me.
Yeah.
But it's really just getting out of your comfort zone. That's everything in this job is you're going to be uncomfortable doing things. It's uncomfortable to put on a police uniform and go from a 23-year-old college student to now you are enforcing the law and literally stopping people that you don't know on the street, many of whom are very dangerous. It's not some magic power that you get, but you have to go out and do it, or else you'll never become confident in making those stops and being able to be proactive.
Exactly. And even in those examples you provided, like I can think about a younger me that was like, I did find myself over my skis because I did find myself, on my heels rather than on my toes where like, hey, why'd you stop me? Well, how do I want to say it? Like, and then he walks away and I'm like, I don't really, what do I call out? No, I'm just going to let go.
Yeah.
Cool. Like that's really humbling. Yeah. That's okay. Like literally for you to throw the line out there and for nothing to bite or, like, I guess like that metaphor, maybe the fish takes the bait and then swims away. like, cool. Now you have something to work with. Now when you go back, you're like, no, okay, when I get out next time, oh, you know what? I'm actually going to hit up a buddy that's free. Like, hey, there's a bunch of these people loitering outside under a sign. Like, let's contact them. There's like 5 of them. I'm pretty sure I saw the dude in blue and the dude in purple, like do a hand to hand. Let's focus on them and watch everyone else. And so when you walk up, you're
Yep.
like, hey, you're not free to go. But if 3 walk off, you're like, hey, you 2, like, sit down. And then you have
Yeah.
everything you need to articulate, right? Like, but maybe it takes those sloppy reps, I'll call them, to get the confidence and recognize what you need to do next time.
And it's actually something that I talked with Tom Reiner about when he retired. I asked him because what I found over the years is like, when I was a new officer, I was stopping everything and anything, all night long. I mean, I was just anything I saw that I was doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And I got some great arrests and great context from that. But slowly over time, what I've realized is now I can go out and I can make 3 or 4 stops that are quality stops. It's like you build this ability to kind of gauge what's a good contact and more worth your time.
Yeah.
Not having to do with the crime itself, but it's just you become an experienced police officer that way. And I asked Tom Reiner that, who's like the king of proactivity. I mean, nobody compares to that guy. He's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked him the same thing, and he said, yeah, like over time, I would stop everything, and then I just saw what to stop. I stopped having to stop the BS contacts that are a waste of my time. I just got really good at it and could see what was worth my time.
Yeah. It's pattern recognition.
And that's how you build that.
Yeah. It's like, this is, to be clear for the haters out there, and I don't think many are listening, but this is pattern recognition on behaviors. We're not talking about like bias-based policing. We're talking about behaviors and suspicious activity. So over time, through reps, you get better at things through pattern recognition. It's just like, I wish I had been aware of that concept in everything in life, more than like a year or 2 ago. But that's really everything. Like literally when your wife or spouse or partner, right, says, I'm fine, like the tone, like it's pattern recognition. You know when something's not fine, and you know whether you should let it sit, whether you should, or hopefully you're working towards knowing. I mean, we'll never have it fully figured out, but that's part of the thing too. Like, so it's really that for anything. It's just paying attention, but putting yourself in the position to pay attention through trying, through reps.
Yes. And it is, like you said, it's not when I say, you see what the good stops are, I'm talking about it's completely behavior based, right? I mean, if I have a civilian in my car, they may point out to me something that they're like, oh my God, look at how this is so suspicious. And I'll go, no, it's not. That's just the people that hang out in this neighborhood. But then I see the way that a certain person is behaving to my presence, behaving to stuff around them. And that can kind of help you build what's going to be a good stop. But man, that comes from thousands of contacts.
And even from like,
to be able to do that really well.
For the really new person or the person coming in, like an example of that is it's illegal to turn off without signaling, right? Like we are agreed, you're supposed to signal when you drive. It doesn't mean like when you're new, you might pull over everyone in front of you that doesn't signal. But then after some time, or maybe right when you're brand new, or maybe even before you're caught, you can hear this and recognize the difference of you pull in behind somebody and immediately they turn off the next available driveway without signaling, or the next available street. And then they actually accelerate quite a bit through a neighborhood where you should technically decelerate. Like these are clues. These are really like, so you have it. They've already done a couple of legal things. Now it's like articulating that. So not just, well, I feel weird, but I don't want it to be like pretext. It's not. It's how I explained it.
Pretext is if
you have to recognize the difference.
Something.
Not to go in the weeds there. Shout out to Tom Reiner, episode 88. If you haven't listened to that legend, but yeah, Sam, no, please keep going.
Okay. Do you want me to keep talking about proactive policing, or do you want me to talk about?
I don't know. There's so many opportunities.
Yeah. So
I think what I'd like to talk about is, I think, certainly in the region, people know the type of cop you are, and a lot of. Well, I'm glad we laid some foundational stuff for your career was so people have heard like the type of cop you are. If they don't know you, haven't met you, and won't meet you, I think it's just what we have to offer is insight on all those experiences. So you have super proactive cop that came in wanting to do the job in all these like iconic, impactful ways, and then now in your career, so many years later, it doesn't even feel like your foot's off the gas. Like you're just applying it like smarter. And I appreciate all the insight to new cops about proactive work to self-care and peer support. I'm curious, like, if there were some kind of overarching themes as it came to how to navigate the job. And there's a lot of ways we can go with
Yeah.
that. I mean, there's like, Ferguson Floyd, there's self-care, there's mental health support, therapy, just wherever you want to go. I just know that the viewer or the listeners will have a lot of value.
Sure. Okay. So I guess I can talk about a little bit kind of my experiences and the different roles I had and kind of what I learned along the way with that. Um, so when I came on as an FTO, I only had about 4 years on. I was still pretty young. I think I was 20, 27, 28 years old. I remember thinking, hey, I don't know enough. That was my first thought. Like, I don't know enough to be an FTO. I still feel like I'm learning the job, and now I'm going to be responsible for teaching somebody. And I had some mentors at the time reassure me, no, you should do this. You should put in for it. And what I did find is that brand new officers out of the academy, you will know more than them. Even with, a few years on, you have stuff you can teach them. But especially be open to more senior people still teaching you. I think a lot of people that I had as students said I was a very stressful FTO. I tried to fix the way I talk and
One really iconic one, and we'll leave that one open.
Well, yeah, but if this is the one I'm thinking of, that's a different story. We don't need to get into that. But everybody said that I was stressful. I think it's the way I talk, the way I communicate.
Really,
if you're a new officer,
is what was shared to me.
Yeah, sure, yeah. And I really did try not to come off as stern. But I took a ton of, probably almost too much to heart the progress of my students. I would say that FTO is like, if you have a good student, a great student, it can be fun. It's great. But when you have a really bad student, man, it's horrible. It's the most stressful thing. An analogy that I thought of is like, it's like teaching somebody to drive a bus. And you've had this person, and when you go back to work in a few days, you have to let that person drive the bus. You have to put people on that bus and let this person drive it, and they're going to crash that bus because you've seen them crash it every time. But every time you come back to work, you have to let them drive that bus and try to teach them again how to drive it. And so I remember that just, when I had really bad students, it was stressful. But it's probably the most rewarding thing I've ever done. A lot of the officers that I trained are now in pretty important roles at the department. Yeah. And I've had a few of them come to me and say, hey, I learned more from you, even though I was stressed out of my mind. I learned more from you than I did from my other FTOs. And that's like, number A, I don't believe them, but that's what they said. But B, that's like the greatest compliment I think you could ever get.
You should believe them because they said it.
Yeah. I did go back to being an FTO recently, and at my older age, I think I was a lot less stressful to my students. I was a little less intense at my age now than I was when I was in my 20s.
You're more wise. You're more. I mean, that's emotional self-awareness, right? Like you're stern and you're excited. So they're like, "Why are you yelling at me?" You're like, "I'm not yelling at you." Like,
I'm not.
Like, why do you hate me? It's like, I don't. You're great.
Yeah, you're doing great.
Just giving you a lot of feedback, so I know you can take it.
No,
there's a couple things I want to say. One is that you're talking about these, young FTOs, that are, or maybe people that are getting nudged to be FTOs. I think it's so much more important, like in the large majority of roles, your passion, your track record than your arbitrary amount of time, right? People say they don't have enough time. I don't have enough time. I should be 5 years on to be an FTO. I should be 10 years in to be a sergeant. Well, like globally, in a real true sense, nationally in Canada, right? Like we don't have time. Like, no, if we play by those arbitrary rules of convention or tradition, then we won't have trainers and we won't have supervisors. So if you have the right stuff, you have the right values and the right acumen, the right, I suppose, aptitude. If people are nudging you from your peer group and above, like, and you're excited to entertain it, then yes, like look into it, seek feedback, and dive in. Right? Like if you're really like, no, I really don't want to because I want to do this other thing. That's different. I love the example that you gave, though. I just lost my train of thought. Okay, so you're talking about new FTOs, but then you're talking about, oh yeah, the bus. Okay,
Yeah, the bus. Yeah.
so I love the bus metaphor because as you're saying that, I'm like trying not to laugh because sometimes it's like you have to teach someone how to drive the bus, even though they
Yes.
perceivably should have known how to drive or should have learned how to drive in academy. But like literally, it felt sometimes like you're trying to teach someone how to drive. You're like, oh my gosh, we're gonna crash. Literally, not just the bus
Yeah.
allegory. Um, but yeah, it's like
And you give them all this tips on how to drive the bus, and you're like, hey, maybe on your off time, practice driving your car. And then they go home and they sit at home and they're like, I'm not driving my car. That stresses
yeah.
me out. And then they come back and
Yeah, and then you try to
they
find
still
ways
can't
to
drive
keep
the
more
bus.
people off the bus because you're like, it's going to crash.
Yeah.
But then your peers are like, hey, put more people on the bus. This person has to learn. So that's the metaphor.
Yeah.
But then to the point of like, you're amazing students, and I would agree. When you have a bad student, it's like the worst thing ever. Like 10 hours
Yes.
feels like 20. When you have a great student and you're like partners, it's almost like Speed. Some of the kids probably haven't seen the original Speed, but it's like, hey, drive the bus. I'm going to be like taking bombs apart under the bottom, like as we go, like speed up, right? Because you trust them. It's
Yeah.
like, it's a 2-person car. It's fun and it's rewarding. So I love that you brought that up because the purpose of mentorship and leadership, which is what we talk about a lot.
And, I'm fortunate that some of the students I got, I mean, some of my best students, like I said, have gotten into great roles at the department. And it's just awesome to see. Like, if I could have been any small part of that, it's great. It's worth the stress of when you're going through it. And so if somebody has people that's telling them to be an FTO, they should consider it. Now, I will also say, I think still to this day, it takes a number of years before you can handle every call that comes across your screen. I would say 4 to 5 years before you're confident in every call that you get. And that was my biggest issue when I had 4 years on, is that I was finally getting to the point where I could pace my work and just get every call done at a speed that I wanted. And then I had a student and everything was slowed down. And I just wasn't at the right mindset to be slowed down like that. Just something to consider when you're new and you become an FTO, because that's pretty much all of our FTOs.
Yeah.
It's just be prepared for that.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
I think a couple things are 4 to 5 years. That's at a busy department where you see a lot. And so for some folks in smaller towns or just slower agencies, like it's okay. It's okay to not have all the answers. Like, but give yourself the credit of judgment and values and conviction to be like, okay, I know how to find the resources. I know how to hit up my buddy, because it's not time. Time is arbitrary, because I'll give this example. You take an administrator, I really humbly raise my hand, like how many calls do I know how to do proficiently right now? Like, no, I'm going to clunk through them. Like at best case scenario, I'm going to phone a friend, meaning Sam or another, like, or a 2-3 year officer, and be like, hey, how do you do this now? Like, I don't even have a login for this because I don't do it anymore.
Yep.
And so it becomes clunky, but like, do I know how to be safe on a traffic stop? I hope so. I really hope so. Right. Like, that's a nod to leaders to stay connected enough. And it may feel easy to say it now because I haven't been in the role that long, but it's necessary. Like, you need to know what your people are doing. You need to be competent in the generalities at a minimum, and be able to plug in and be of assistance. If you're so far removed, like, how can you appropriately lead the thing you're trying to lead if you're that out of touch?
Yep.
So a little soapbox moment there, as it's also just a self-challenge. It's not like a talking down to you. It's like, hey, we can do better.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'd be curious, Sam, we don't have a ton of time, but I want to know, as you continue to navigate this career with so much positive energy and clearly a lot of positive reflection on self-care and attuning to your mental health, and now you're a family man, like how do you do all these things? And are there kind of governors or themes that you think about to help you balance these things in a busy agency, challenging shift work, and additional challenges as you like build and grow and tend to a family? Like, it's all the things that so many people have to try to toggle between.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the last 4-5 years have been really challenging for law enforcement, especially in the Seattle area. We went through, all the changes with the reform laws and departments adjusting to that. And what I started to notice is that, and I think this happens with cops in general, is they start to feel as if everybody is out against them, and B, that their work is just work and it doesn't matter. And as far as everybody being out against you, I mean, it's just not true. The only way that you can feel that way is if you are ignoring the 95% of positive reactions you have with the community every single day. Whether you're working in Kent, King County, or, the most known pro law enforcement part of the country, the vast majority of people I come into contact with, they don't hate the police. You can tell when you talk to them. They're glad to see us. At least in Kent, I can say that there isn't a neighborhood in Kent really where people don't want us there, especially the higher crime areas. But you could also go to that neighborhood and just focus on what the criminals are saying to you and how much they hate the police. And then you start to think that's how this whole community feels, or this whole apartment complex feels, or this whole neighborhood feels. And that's just not true. Try to keep that perspective. That's really how I got through the last few years, because everything changed. I mean, it got really bad. We couldn't, there were times where I'm watching people I want to involve that I know need to be involved. They need help, but there was a short amount of time where we couldn't use force on that person. And this person was so out of their mind that I literally had to wait until they committed a crime before I could involuntarily commit them to get them help, right? All of that stuff is very discouraging. But I just tried to keep the perspective that, the vast majority of people don't feel this way. People want us out there. This person, if I can eventually help them, no matter how much extra work it is, it's worth it. And I think the other side of it, people start to see calls and cases as work that they want to get done with as soon as possible. We all do it to an extent. If you go to work and you have 20, 25 calls holding, yeah, you might want to clear those calls off the board as soon as possible so you can go do what you want to do. Mm-hmm. But what you shouldn't let that translate to is when you talk to that person, because that 24th call that you've taken, that person's reporting a crime to you. To you, it doesn't matter. It's a small part of your day. To them, it's probably the worst thing that's happened to them in a long time. These are still people. The attitude I try to keep is that, how would I want to handle this call if it was my family member that was calling? These people aren't work. They're real people with real problems that are calling us. Now, does that mean that I spend an hour on every single call? And if something's small, I sit there for an hour and a half making this person feel good? No, that's unreasonable. I need to balance my day. But just make people feel heard. Talk to them. And what you'll see is that you'll get much more out of the work that you do, and you won't become callous, and you won't develop those negative attitudes. At least for me, that's been the case. As far as balancing that with my family, man, having kids changed my life. I have a 5-year-old daughter and I have a son now. Really, for me, what I look at is I want to provide my kid with the childhood that I didn't have. And that's an overwhelming push for me every single day that I interact with my kids. I want to be a good father. I hope more than anything that she looks back on how I was as a father and says that I did a good job, or that I was there for her, or that that I cared. That's just a huge motivator for me. And if I let the stress from my work bleed over, and I come home and I just want to sit on my couch because I'm burnt out from work, and don't hang out with my kid is not going to remember that I was burnt out from work. They're going to remember that I did not hang out with them and I didn't spend time with them. You got to force yourself to do it.
Yeah.
When you have a kid. And that's kind of what motivates me as far as my family goes, in a nutshell.
Yeah. I love it, man. And there's so much that I heard, and the thing that's jumping out at me and almost like a neon sign that's blinking as you're talking is purpose, right? And it's a couple things that you underlined that I wish, we could shout from the rooftops, but, having it on a podcast where people can listen to it all over the world is a pretty good consolation. But everyone is not against you. And we get so down on ourselves. If we say it enough, we start believing it. And that's the power of belief and the power of mindset. And I find myself thinking about abundance mindset and growth mindset so much, especially in the last few weeks, that I sometimes I feel like I need to say hey, I know it sounds cheesy, but I'm it shouldn't sound cheesy, because if you succeed or you fail, it's up to you. We can agree on that. Mm-hmm. And if you believe you will succeed or you believe you will fail, generally you will be right. you'll be right either way.
Yes.
Right. So if you think everyone is out against you, you will find those times where it feels that way, and you'll magnify it in your brain, and it'll start to consume you. We've all seen friends and peers like go down that cynical kind of tunnel that we've all dipped in. I've had my time in there.
Sure.
And that's why I try to bounce out when I do and really reflect on these things. Your work doesn't matter, right? Like, I think that's why it's so important. And I think it's why I enjoy talking about why people came into this job or this field, because if we just remember why we came in pretty quickly, we should be able to shake that off. And yeah, it is very toxic and like kind of, it drags you down at times. It can feel like it's drowning you when you don't feel appreciated because of X, Y, and Z, because of the media, because of social media, because of maybe your own close friends and family that have kind of ostracized you because you're a cop in recent years, right?
Sure.
Like, that sucks. But you know what? It's not the whole picture. It's certainly only a minuscule part of that that's been allowed to take over this large portion of your brain and awareness. There's one example that it comes up so much in the culture that there's so many memes built around it, right? And that's your administration doesn't care. And before anyone gets it twisted, it'll be like, hey, I'm trying to just back up admin around the world. No, we talk about culture and leadership so much as a focal point here because I think there's a lot of opportunity. And sometimes it's people showing up in the wrong ways or just not being heard the right way. But I will say, and this is a challenge for myself included, like, I shouldn't derive my value from what somebody tells me about my work I do, right? Like, it should be for the people I'm working for. And my role, ultimately, it is for the community. But my day-to-day role is for my sergeants. Like, I have a chunk of influence, and technically it is my 4 sergeants, and they all have crews. And I have to believe that, like, if I show up and those 4 sergeants feel heard, validated, they feel like they have the support they need, they bring me problems and I can be a piece of their solution, not just be like, hey, I hear you, cool, like, move on. Like, then they can do their job the way they need to for their officers, and their officers can do their job the way they need to for the 25 callers that you're talking about, right? Like, I can't help but believe that and feel like that has to be such a focal. It's certainly a part of my goal. Nobody's perfect, right? It's what I try to circle back to in this thought of like, your work doesn't matter. Like, do you need someone else to validate that? You feel supported by your Sarge? Awesome. If your commander seems to be on another planet, like, why does that matter? Like, you know why you do what you do. Your partners know it. Your family knows it. The victims know it. Is that not enough?
Yeah. And I've worked for great supervisors, and I've worked for supervisors that I absolutely hated working for. Like you're saying, I mean, the one thing that didn't change through all that is the calls and the callers. When I had a horrible sergeant, it wasn't like everybody I talked to hated me and just was negative about my work, right? I think a good way to remind yourself is to look at the people around you, right? So I think a lot of people, when they've been on for a long time, they look back at how it used to be, right? So I could look back on how it was to be a cop in 2016 in Kent, and we were just, we could chase everything, and it was awesome, and we worked with everybody was squared away, and everybody was out being proactive, and if you were lazy, everybody hated you and ostracized you, and it was just this awesome environment to be in, to be a cop. And I could look back on that and go, man, this is not what it used to be. I hate what it is now. But in reality, my work has not changed that much. And the way you can remind yourself of that, look at the brand new officers. The brand new officer off FDO, are they excited or are they miserable? 100% of the time, unless they shouldn't be in this job, they're going to be excited. Yep. They're going to be pumped up. When they hear those tones go off, they're going to be excited to go out and go to that call. That's because police work is still fun in 2024, just like it was in 2012 or 2006 or whenever you started. It may have changed a lot, but it's still an awesome job. And if you truly don't feel that way, right? I mean, why put yourself in this amount of jeopardy and this amount of danger, this amount of damage to your mental health if you hate what you're doing?
Yeah. It's literally impossible for you to accurately know how different it is, right? We're not looking at data on a map. Like, that's your memory of those times, and you're in a different place in life. You're literally a different person, hopefully, because you've been growing. And like you and I, like, we look at the job differently when you have kids. You should, because your life is different and
Sure.
we're just older. So how we contact people, what we do, and how we feel afterwards, like that may be a thing. Like, how does your back feel after that chase? Like, that's just literal facts, right?
Yeah.
So I think that is a responsible and pertinent thing to think about is, hey, like, what has changed? Well, a lot, sure, but also me. A lot has changed, but
Yes.
those coming in, yeah, I love that, because I think that interacting with younger folks, mentoring, like, that's one of the best ways you can come back to purpose and truly like a purposeful life and career. Like, what else do you really need? And I love how you shared about your kids. I mean, I see that. I think it's always a struggle for people that are really career motivated and just doers, right? But uh, as you said that, I feel like times that I do a better job, again, compartmentalizing, because when I get home and I have X amount of time with my kid until she goes to bed, like, how do I want to be remembered? Do I want to be remembered like looking
Yeah.
at my phones on these really important texts and emails, or like just do it if you really have to do it when she goes to bed, right? You get this fresh slate, and then you got your spouse, your partner, right? So that's another thing. Like, we can't be ignoring all these
Yeah.
things. So
Exactly.
no, man, I really appreciate the groundedness and the approach, and just you sharing story and all these insights. I know it's a wealth of information for not just new people, seasoned officers and retirees even, right? And myself included.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Anything you want to leave the listeners with?
No, I mean, we talked about a lot. So, I mean, yeah, I appreciate you having me on here and thinking of me and thinking that I had something to add to this conversation. And I'm glad I could share some of my perspectives. I really appreciate
Absolutely do, man. Proud to have you. Proud to know you.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.